Not everyone with selective mutism is autistic or has Asperger syndrome, but based on my experience, everyone I have encountered who is autistic or has Asperger syndrome tends to have a form of mutism, selective mutism, and where we just can't seem to communicate with some individuals. And it's not them, it's us. We just can't connect. This is an important part, at least of my life, with autism, and I'm guessing probably you've had some encounters with it too, and maybe you still are having some difficulties because it doesn't seem to go away easily. Maybe it doesn't go away at all, ever. So let's talk about some of these problems and challenges we face with selective mutism. And the first thing we need to do is just understand what it is. So we found this quote, and it says a selective mutism is a severe anxiety disorder where a person is unable to speak in certain social situations, for example, with classmates at school, or maybe with relatives that you don't see often. So you just kind of freeze up. So number one is just unable to speak. I mean, you just can't speak. It's not that you don't want to speak, but you just can't speak. And the way that I have explained this in the past, we'll say it again, for those who really don't understand what this is, selective mutism, it really is. And I guess I ought to throw this in while I'm thinking of it. When we call it selective mutism, it's not necessarily that the person with it selects who he or she will not talk to. It kind of selects itself. But the analogy that I like to use with most people, because they can identify with it, is imagine that you are speaking to a crowd and you're not accustomed to that and you experience stage fright. And I have seen people have such severe stage fright that they get on stage and they can't talk. They can't communicate. They're just, it's anxiety, it's stress. It is a phobia, it is a fear. I call it a phobia because here's a crowd, and these same people that they're facing in front of the crowd, they can talk to one-on-one easily. Well, my experience is just the opposite. I can talk to a crowd easily. But talking to people one-on-one is very challenging, and most of them, it is, most of them, it's downright impossible to carry on a lucid, intelligent conversation, and even when you try, it doesn't come out right. There's that thing that we talk about in past videos where our mind kind of scrambles because it seems we have too many connectors in our brains if you have autism, and they all fire at once, and what comes out when we try to speak is, it sounds confusing. Doesn't make sense to the person listening, and they just assume, okay, this guy's a nut, let's get away from him. Or they just kind of turn their head and go a different direction. That's the way that you are perceived. So selective mutism is a serious problem. And when we try to force it, it doesn't work. That, by the way, is why I encourage people who are autistic or suspect they're autistic, to go talk to a counselor, go talk to a therapist, because these are people who are really good, who excel at and have studied the problem. You know, if you're sick, you go to a doctor, right? Goes to somebody who knows what they're talking about. But it's important to understand, I believe, and this is again to reiterate number one, it is not an unwillingness to speak, it is an inability to speak. You just can't speak, and if you try to force it, you don't make sense, which is usually worse than not talking, so you don't say anything at all. Second thing we need to understand is it may include a sensory integration dysfunction. Now that term may seem a little bit strange, but basically what it means, it's compounded sometimes by sensory issues. So you may feel very comfortable in your home talking to somebody. But then you go into a crowded place like, I don't know, a shopping mall, go to a county fair, go to a church, go to school, go any place where there is a lot of, grocery store, where there's a lot of noise going on or lights going on or people going on, just activity in general. A restaurant at lunchtime, avoid that. This is advice to me. Avoid that at all costs. That is one of the worst situations you could ever be in. All these people talking at once, the clanging of silverware, the noise in the kitchen, drives me absolutely crazy. And then you got all those smells and scents, coming out of the kitchen. Now, if I go to a restaurant, I want to go 3 in the afternoon where I don't have all that sensory input, where I don't have the people to contend with, and I can actually focus on enjoying my meal, depending, of course, on where you go eat. But yeah, it is affected by our environment, and that can just make it, that can just compound it. Or as they like to say, to repeat myself, sensory integration dysfunction. Number 3, and this is the one where this will strike home with most of the people who are listening, and that is workplace or school challenges. Let's imagine that you get hired onto a job, right? And you go to work and you literally cannot speak to your coworkers. I mean, you just can't talk to them. You like to talk to them. You think you probably could talk to them, but you can't. You cannot open up and speak. How are you going to keep that job? Well, the answer to that question is you're not going to keep that job. That's one of the reasons, among others, that people with autism, with Asperger syndrome, high-functioning autism, have such a difficult time holding down a real 9-to-5 job. My solution to that, as I told you many times, was I just hired myself, started my own business, then I didn't have to fool with it. I didn't, the only people I had talked to were my employees, and I was okay with them. Most of them I knew anyhow. So when you go to a workplace and you can't communicate, it's a phobia. It's a fear. It's stage fright. Every person that you talk to, it's like someone standing in front of a huge crowd. You have stage fright. How do you function? How do you get along? How does that work? People think you're crazy. Literally, I'm not exaggerating. They think you got a mental issue, serious mental issue. So, it's not long before you find yourself out of a job and go look for another one. And you can only do that so long because once you have a history of being dismissed for no apparent reason, usually something trumped up that you really didn't do anything wrong, so they have to make up something to get you out the door. It's hard to get employment, and you wind up being unemployed. That's why I think maybe the statistic is maybe 30% of people with Asperger syndrome are able to work, able to have real jobs. Very tragic, and the same thing applies in school. This is kind of cruel, but you take a kid who is 5, 6 years old, I'm trying to think how long it's been since I was in school, 65 years since I started school. At that point in time, you started school in kindergarten. There was no pre-K, but you go to school, you're 4 or 5 years old. I think 5 or 6 was the age, and you walk into a classroom, and you can't talk to anybody. You just can't do it. And it gets worse as you get older, because you learn that you are separate from everyone else, and by the time you're in 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade, you literally cannot speak to the other kids in the class. Just can't do it. There's nothing there. Now, you may give them a nod, you may answer with a yes or no in best situations, but, you go through the entire school career doing that. Makes it very difficult, very challenging to succeed in school. But I got to tell you, I've encountered many people with autism, with Asperger syndrome, who are very successful academically. Somehow they managed to overcome that. Maybe they didn't have the problem with selective mutism that others of us had. But when I was a kid in school, I could not talk to anybody. It wasn't that I didn't want to, because I wanted to. I just couldn't do it. And when you try to do it, it comes out strange, and that just makes it worse because they make fun of you, right? So we have these challenges at workplace. We have these challenges at school because the phobia is so strong that we just cannot talk. And it persists into adulthood. So here I am pushing 70 years old, and there are some people that I still struggle just to speak to, just to be polite to. And I want to be nice to people. I want to show people that, yeah, I don't dislike you. I want you to like me, but I just can't talk to them. I try, but it never comes out right. Number 4, kind of akin to number 3, and that is situational consideration, and that is there are some people that we can talk to just fine. Now, the odd thing about this is you have maybe a close friend or maybe a close family member And you communicate with them like they would communicate with everybody. So they don't know you even have this problem because maybe they have not seen it. You know, somebody says, hi to you, how are you? And the only thing you come up with is fine, if you can come up with anything at all. But when you're talking to your good friend, you're talking to your family member, maybe they don't see that. Maybe they don't sense that in you. Well, you know, that's okay, I guess, but how far do you go with this? Usually you can't go very far, period. I know in my lifetime I've managed to communicate with a few people, you know, maybe have a girlfriend, all is well with her, but get outside that little bubble. No, I can't talk to people. I also notice that when I'm driving down the road in traffic and there's all these other people, I don't have a problem with them, none whatsoever. You know, they honk at me, I honk back. You know, I weave in and out of traffic. I don't, or I did when I was a kid, drove crazy. But I didn't have any phobia of people as long as they were in their cars and I was in my car. But as soon as you get out of your car, it's a different story. So wherever you go, you got this problem. And with me, selective mutism was, it selected just about everybody. I mean, that is no exaggeration, just about everybody. And people have a difficult time understanding that. There are a few very rare people who seem to have this knack of, or seemed to have this knack of communicating with me, but that they were very rare. And I'm grateful for them, but it would happen very, very seldom. So it's situational. You know, close friends, family, you're okay. But outside of that, you're probably not okay. Or maybe your boundaries are a little bit more flexible than mine were and still are to a point. But the problem persists. Number 5, and this, in my opinion, is a big one, and that is we are simply misunderstood. We talk a lot in my videos about being misdiagnosed by other people because, okay, we have selective mutism. We are afraid of talking to other people. We have stage fright, one-on-one stage fright. It's the best way to call it, best way to term it. And they interpret that as, well, the guy's just quiet, or he's just shy, or maybe he is aloof and arrogant, or maybe he's just playing it safe. I've actually had a teacher tell me that. I get you. You're just playing it safe. You want to stay out of trouble. You're being quiet. They just don't understand, and how could they? I mean, they don't have any training. They don't have any experience. They don't have a point of reference. So they rely on their point of reference, and their point of reference is when people don't talk, it's because that's just their nature to be quiet, or maybe they are arrogant or aloof, or maybe they're playing it safe or whatever. Sometimes people think it's just odd, you know. This person is just, again, they don't have a point of reference, and they have to attribute your selective mutism to something, so they say, hey, this guy's kind of weird, he's just kind of odd, that's just the way he is. Or they would say, maybe they would think, they may not say it, that you're mentally unstable. Well, is anxiety, is a phobia mental instability? Maybe it is, I don't know. But I do know this, autism is not a mental disorder, it's a neurological disorder. We need to understand and distinguish the difference, and when we understand that selective mutism can be a serious challenge to people with autism, particularly, reiterating what we said before, particularly in school and at the workplace, it is something that really needs to be dealt with. And my opinion, take it for what it's worth, but my opinion, maybe the best way to deal with it is to go talk to a therapist, somebody who actually knows and has studied the root causes and how to overcome them. You see those two rectangles? Well, let's keep talking if you want. Just click one of those and the conversation continues. If not, thanks for stopping by and see you all next time.